Halo, Dr. Laura. Halo. Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. My voice
Let
is
me know
clear
when you
now,
want me to share my slides or anything.
but we will start on 2 minutes again. We will start the session is 2 minutes again, Laura.
Okay, fabulous.
Okay.
Should I
Wait
get
a
my
minute.
slides up on the screen?
Wait.
My
Maybe
presentation.
2 minutes again. Yeah, your presentation 2 minutes again. Wait. Wait. Okay. We will prepare it in here. I'm Dr. Ari. I will be your moderator for this section.
Thank you very much. And it's lovely to see everyone.
Okay. Hello, Dr. Laura.
Yeah,
Hello.
yeah.
Hello, long time no see, Dr. Laura.
Hey. I hope the conference
So,
is going well.
yes. So you will be with my colleague, Dr. Ari, to be your moderator, and maybe someday you can come to us.
Lovely, lovely.
Okay.
I'll see
Okay.
if I
Thank
can
you.
get my presentation so that you can all see it.
Yes. Maybe you can try to share it.
There we are.
Okay,
Can you all see
okay,
that?
Sure. Yeah. It's
okay.
clear now, Dr. Laura.
It's clear.
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Yes. But maybe we need time for our master astronomy to start the ceremony, and then later we can jump into your session.
Yeah, okay. I'll stop the share for
Okay.
now, but that's a useful test.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Laura.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the second session of this seminar with us, your MZ, as your. Okay, to the second session of this seminar with us, your MC, who will accompany. So, with our second speaker, Dr. Laura. And before we introduce Dr. Laura, we will introduce our moderator first. We as the MC will, but before we introduce our moderator, we as the MC would like to inform you that there will be attendance taken, which will be a requirement for your certificate.
Okay, you'll require to have and set a screenshot with the presenter and your camera on during session 2 with Mrs. Laura N. Wender and session 4 with Ms. Jacqueline Karen Stella Unduraga. The attendance link will be shared in the second K during the fourth speaker session with Mrs. Karen.
Okay, now the second speaker will be guided by our great moderator, Dr. Ari Kusumadewi, SPD MPD. But before that, a quick introduction for our new moderator, for our dear moderator. Dr. Ari Kusumadewi, SPD MPD, born in Jayapura on 15th of June 1986, is a lecturer at Surabaya State University, and in the last 5 years, she has taught 48 courses and has conducted 21 community service activities. And now, for Dr. Ari Kusuma-Dewi SPD, MPD, the golden place is yours.
okay, thank you. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. In this session, our keynote speaker is leading expert in the field of social justice. As we know, social justice is very interesting issues. Currently, many individual problems arise from a lack of social justice, such as a large number of people who are employed, like health insurance, and even like access to education, thus further expanding to marginalization of marginalized groups. First, I would like to greet our keynote speaker, Dr. Laura Anna Winter from Manchester University. Good morning, Dr. Laura.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. It's first thing in the morning here, so it's I think you've had a few sessions before this, haven't you?
Oh, good. We are can wait interesting material first. Let me read your curriculum vitae. Okay, full name is Dr. Laura Anna Winter. Education and qualification, academic and professional qualification, including university. 2013, professional doctoral in counseling and psychology. And 2009, Bachelor of Psychology, First Class University of Manchester. Present appointment includes dates 2019 onward, senior lecturer in education and counseling psychology, School of Environment, Education and Development, University of Manchester. Previous employment and appointment held included dates 2013 and until 2019, lecturer in education and counseling psychology, University of Manchester. Membership of academic and professional studies, 2015 until 2016 and 2018 until 2019, British Education Research Association, 2015 onward, Fellow of Higher Education Academic, following completion of the humanities new academic programs at the University of Manchester. Publication, Dr. Lola changed her surname to Winter in December 2014 on 29 November. Total citation on Google Scholar were 780 and high index scores 17 and I index 22. Research grant awarded February 2022 until July 2022. Project title Insight, co-produced qualitative explore of young women's perspective on psychological distress in their population and priority action for responding. Founder, National Institute for Health Research. Dr. Rara has more than 60 doctoral research students under her supervision. Wow, it's great, Dr. Laura. Okay, for the time to all participants, of the 2025 International Conference of Guidance and Counseling, this section will be divided into two sections. The first section will feature a presentation from Dr. Laura, and the second section is question and answer section. Okay. To the save time, let's listen to the great presentation with the title is The Personal is Political, Social Justice and Politics in Applied Psychology from Dr. Laura. Dr. Laura, time is yours.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For that lovely introduction. I really appreciate the invitation. And as I said, I really hope that the conference is going well for everybody so far. I'll just get my slides up so that hopefully we can all see them. Okay. So, as has been said already, my name's Laura. I'm a counselling psychologist by background, and I'm based at the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. I'm chartered by the British Psychological Society and registered with the Health and Care Professions Council. My role at the university involves both teaching students who are training to become qualified counselling psychologists, along with research, scholarship and writing. And this has been said already, focuses on the intersection between counselling and applied psychology with the social political. So I'm here to talk to you today about social justice and politics in the psychological therapies. And I'm hoping by the end of this talk, you'll have an understanding of the importance of the way in which the personal is political and the interconnections between wellness and fairness, and see the ways in which this might influence and encourage us to change our work as counsellors or as psychotherapists or practitioner psychologists to be more social justice informed. Before I begin, I'd like to give you a little bit of context about who I am as a human being, not just who I am in terms of an academic or my kind of CV. And you'll tell from that, I think, the way in which, because I'm a qualitative researcher, I see who I am as being really important to what I'm doing. So I've been working on social justice for the past 14 years or so, and I'm very passionate about ensuring that we attend both to the personal and the political in applied psychology, but I'm also really aware of the challenges this raises, and also really aware, as I'm speaking to you now, sat in my home in Derbyshire in the United Kingdom, whilst you're all across the world in Indonesia, how the kind of local context and the national context really shapes and will influence some of what I'm saying. So I'll be interested to hear how you think it translates for your context. Personally, I benefit from many socially structured advantages due to the colour of my skin, my education, not currently being disabled. However, as a youngish woman working full-time with 3 young children, I've been acutely aware of the gender inequalities in society and in the broader workplace. As a practitioner who's British and living and working in the United Kingdom, I'm aware of our colonial history and the ongoing impact and influence of colonialism on our writings, our teaching, and our life in this country more generally. There are some of us in counselling psychology and applied kind of allied disciplines who are trying to draw attention to the problems of this and the role psychology and therapy has played in social ills. But of course, this is an ongoing process. So I'm going to aim to talk for about kind of 35, 40 minutes or so and leave some time, as we've said, for some reflections and questions at the end. But I'm going to begin with asking you to imagine a scenario for me, an analogy, which I'm going to then use to unpack and consider this scenario to make use of it in our argument and consider the similarities between what I'm asking you to imagine and psychology as we consider the personal and the political. The initial framing of this analogy I'm gonna be using is something I heard Professor Pravitha Pathale from University College London use recently in an excellent talk she gave, so credit and thanks to her. But I'm going to take it a little bit further today if possible. So there are 1 or 2 moments that you might wince a little bit on the kind of overgeneralizations.
Recording in progress.
Hoping that you can forgive those moments. So, firstly, I'd like you to picture a really big room in your minds. Okay, big room in front of you. The room has lots of different people in it, and they're all stood and they're sat in different groups, on their own, small groups, big groups, all over the space. And the room itself is absolutely horribly cold. It's freezing cold, like the image on the slide. The image on the slide brings to mind this freezing cold space, and I'd like you to imagine that. 8 or 9 degrees, not very pleasant temperature at all. Everyone's very, very cold. And it's cold for a variety of reasons. So let's say there's some broken windows, there's a problem with the heating, maybe. Needless to say, everyone in the room is feeling pretty miserable, and their current psychological well-being is not good, at all good. Now, historically, perhaps, if applied psychologists or counsellors or psychotherapists were looking at or talking with the people in the room about their experience of being miserable, traditional psychological approaches to formulating or to understanding distress or mental health problems would probably look at understanding the fact that somebody's in a really cold and unpleasant room as one contributing factor to the person feeling miserable. So it might well feature in a conceptualisation like the image I've got on the slide from cognitive behaviour therapy. If formulations from CBT, from cognitive behaviour therapy, aren't something you're familiar with, you don't really need to worry about the detail of this as I'm speaking. But in short, what we have here is a visual representation of the things which are both causing and keeping someone's problems going from within this one particular theoretical model. So, for example, you can see the environmental factors and the triggers up at the top. One of the boxes up high there says trigger situation in it. And that might be where the cold comes in, or the box labelled environmental kind of factors. Other models, psychological models, look at distress differently and have different understandings of why we end up feeling the way we do. But I think it's probably fair to say that most psychological models would account for the cold as an environmental or social factor in understanding somebody's distress. And yes, most psychological models would understand that this situation is definitely contributing to somebody in that room feeling miserable. But it's interesting to note, as I go on to discuss it, despite the fact that psychology says it's biopsychosocial in its approach to mental health, one which understands the importance of the biological determinants of mental health, the psychological determinants of mental health, and the social determinants of mental health, much of our attention is focused on the bottom of this diagram, and the psychological determinants only. From a CBT model, that might be about thinking about the thoughts, the behaviours, the feelings, the physical sensations. In terms of research funding and resource, the attention is largely paid to the biological and the psychological. So we know an awful lot more about the psychological and the biological factors in causing and maintaining distress than we do about the social. However, having said that, there is less work, but that doesn't mean there's no work. There's quite a lot of work on social determinants of mental health. Decades of research which illustrate the importance of these social determinants in explaining distress. Apparently, the idea that social factors can have a large impact on human health goes back to at least ancient Greece. But the idea of health being impacted by social factors didn't have a global academic influence until 1998, when the World Health Organization published their first edition of Social Determinants of Health, The Solid Facts. The lead authors were two names you may well have heard of. At some point, they're certainly quite prominent within the United Kingdom, Richard Wilkinson and Michael Marmot, both of who've gone on to have significant influence in their work in this area. Now, there's a wide body of research, not only in health more broadly speaking, but also in mental health, which demonstrates the significant influence of social factors. So some of these boxes you can see on the slide. So poverty and inequality have an impact on distress. Household income, low educational attainment, unemployment, social isolation. The list, as you see, kind of goes on here. And all of these things negatively impact our well-being and are associated with worse mental health. But if we go back to the cold room I've asked you to imagine just for a moment, we can see that different people are impacted by the cold differently. So some of this might be to do with biological factors, their circulation or their age. It might be to do with existing vulnerabilities, like if somebody already felt a bit unwell before they went in that room, or they might have actually been ill. Some of this might be to do with whether or not they've got a really big, thick coat, a blanket, a hot water bottle, or a hot drink, or extra blankets to put on. Or, as you can see in the bottom left there, it might be whether or not they've ended up next to one of the open or broken windows, how close they are to that. So people in the same environmental conditions in the same space, positioned differently, are impacted differently by what's happening due to lots of different factors. So up to this point, we understand that everyone in the room is miserable, but some people perhaps more or less than others. And that's potentially because of lots of different reasons. Applied psychology, counselling, psychotherapy, has historically tended to deal on the level of the individual, though, as a general rule. So therefore, our interventions or our responses, our psychological practice is often, though not exclusively, focused on how we can help this individual person improve their well-being by changing something in themselves. So if we think about the diagram I presented earlier of a CBT formulation, it might include a reference to the cold being one of the underlying causes of distress, but we might include other psychological factors which are internal to the individual. And that's where most of the psychological intervention would happen. So if we think about the cold room, imagine now that some of the people in this room, but only some of them, because of the resources they have available to them, either economic resources or cultural or social resources, they're able to access some help from someone, say that's a counsellor or a psychotherapist, who is going to help them with how miserable they're feeling. This person might encourage them to make themselves a hot drink if they didn't already have one. They might encourage them to get more blankets or layers. Alternatively, they could help them to start exercising, get them moving to get some body heat going. They might help them work together and huddle together to get some benefit from each other's body heat to stay warm. Or finally, like in the bottom right hand image you've got there, they might help them to remember that things will be okay by working with them to look at how they're thinking about the problem, develop more helpful strategies of thinking and relating to their experience. And all of these things may well help. So if you're one of the people in the room who's really cold and really unhappy, if you exercised, you probably would feel a bit less miserable. If you put on some more clothes, you had a hot drink, you'd probably feel happier. You might possibly feel benefit from having people closer to you, or from challenging your thoughts about it being the worst thing that could possibly happen to you, that it's going to go on forever, or if you distracted yourself from the negative thoughts. So by this point, some people in the room are feeling a little bit less miserable, okay? But there were a few things which are really important to note about the help that we're now seeing happening in this cold room. Firstly, not everyone in the room gets help, because they can't all access it. It's not equal, it's not even. Because you have to pay for it, or you have to know who to ask for help. And it might not be the people who need it the most that do access it. In fact, it probably won't be all the people who need it most that access it, because in order to access it, you need some social capital or existing resources, like I say. And most importantly, because the room remains freezing cold, the majority of people in there, or at least a good chunk of them, continue to be miserable. And potentially, if the people who'd accessed help ran out of hot drinks or blankets or forgot how to manage their thinking about it, they might well return to feeling miserable a few hours, a few weeks, a few days, months later, and need to go back to someone to help them. So life keeps going on like this for some people in the cold room for some time. Some people get help, feel less miserable for a while. Others get help and continue to feel less miserable, whilst other people remain extremely miserable, and everyone is still cold, even the ones who are feeling less unhappy about it. So this is a problem for applied psychologists to wrestle with. And indeed, they have done so for many years. The problem being, why, when we know that the environment plays such a big role, do we continue to only intervene on the individual basis? In this scenario, we can see that individualised help provided to the people in the room has not necessarily impacted people who need it the most. All of the people who I mentioned before who might be feeling it more, they're not necessarily the ones being helped. And we can also see it doesn't necessarily stop problems from recurring in the future and doesn't fix the underlying problems. So what's the alternative? How about we turn the heating up? Or how about we fix and close the windows? We can potentially, as applied psychologists, intervene and advocate for intervention to address the root cause of all of these people feeling miserable, rather than the strategies to help individuals. That's not to say that nobody will continue feeling miserable, because individual reasons about people will probably mean that sometimes they will do, but levels of miserableness will in general be lowered. There is a shift here from acknowledging the social determinants of mental health as being important and saying that we take a biopsychosocial response, but largely responding on the level of the psychological, instead to an approach where we both acknowledge the social determinants of mental health and explicitly work to address those, as well as the biological and the psychological. And this is something that's increasingly being acknowledged as important across the psychological professions more in recent years. There's a move to doing this. For example, with models like the power threat meaning framework, which is gaining some interest in the United Kingdom, which encourages psychologists to start asking what happened to you with the people they're working with, rather than what is wrong with you. But the majority of the research and the majority of the interventions do still focus on the level of the individual. Social justice approaches to psychological practice encourage us to broaden our view beyond the individual and to properly recognise and work to change the social as well as the individual. They also encourage us to take a step further in our thinking, which hopefully I can illustrate in the next parts of the talk. It's a really tricky thing to define social justice. I've been doing work on it for a long time and it's really hard. But the two quotes I've got on the slide there are some of the ideas that we see. That it's about society giving individuals and groups fair treatment and an equal share of benefits, resources and opportunities. It's perhaps quite an umbrella term, it's quite big. It covers things like diversity, change, equity, inequality, oppression, marginalisation, disruption. There's lots to unpack here, but just focusing on two things across these definitions, you can see mentions of the word equity and mentions of the word fairness. If we go back to the cold room again in our minds, an emphasis on social justice, including equity and fairness, encourages us to not only say, let's put the heating on and fix and close the windows, but to go beyond it. So we might ask, a social justice approach might mean that we ask, for example, whether even once the heating is turned on, are there still groups of people who need additional resource? Are there still groups of people who, for whatever reason, need extra heat? So it might be hot water bottles or other equipment perhaps. Do we also need to think about how people might access the parts of the room where they can get near the heat? We might ask who has access to the heating controls, who decides when it's turned on or off and has power to control it, and who decides on resources fixing broken windows. We can look at the environmental factors and take a more neutral stance. So this is a stance that I'm suggesting is opposite, is not the same as a social justice stance. This neutral stance might acknowledge the social determinants of mental health, but just say, okay, we need to turn the heating on and close the windows. Whereas a social justice approach does, by virtue of it being politically informed, encourage us to look at the power relations which underpin the decision making and what's happening in the cold room. Because whether or not the heating is turned on, and whether or not the windows are fixed and closed when they need to be, who has access to the hot water bottles and the blankets, are all factors which are shaped by political decision making. So if we go back to the social determinants of mental health, they are not only social, they are political determinants of mental health. Because all of these things are shaped by and occur because of political decision making and economic decision making. So poverty and inequality, the first block on that slide, it's not just a given, it doesn't just happen. Limited access to healthcare services is not just a given, it doesn't just happen. It doesn't exist by itself. Racism, discrimination, don't just happen. So these social determinants of mental health are not just social, they are political. I think in societies, and I can speak, as I said, mostly from the United Kingdom perspective, but my impression from the literature is that this is global. We talk about these things as if they've become quite normalised. Okay, we think that they're just how societies exist. They're just things that happen, but they're not naturally occurring. They're human-made. When we talk about them as environmental conditions or as social conditions, which we so often do in psychology, I think it sounds like they're outside of our control. They're outside of human controls. They're just a fact of life. But they exist because of political decision making. So this is why myself and others have argued that applied psychology, rather than saying it is neutral or value-free, is in fact inseparable from the political, and necessarily needs to pay attention to politics as well as individual psychology. So importantly, this isn't about saying that psychologists should ignore the individual, should stop talking about cognitive or stop talking about individual factors. We're not saying that at all, but we're saying that the political isn't entirely separable from this. We have a history, I think, of saying psychology is a science and it's neutral and objective. And this makes us think that we can separate off these things, which I don't think we can do. Wellness is inseparable from fairness. Now, when we say political, I think all sorts of things come up for people. And I know that based on the work that I've done so far on psychology and politics, people have various reactions to this. I did a piece of research a few years ago where I asked therapists on their views, their understandings of politics and therapy. And I've put two of the quotes from participants on the slide. Psychology has traditionally ignored politics. There's a culture of silence, a sense of trepidation in talking about these issues. Nutshell, it's a lonely process. and the silence is suffocating because, of course, it impacts our work. So I know that this isn't something people talk about in applied psychology and allied therapeutic professions, or always want to or feel comfortable talking about. But increasingly it's coming into our work. The increasing political polarisation that we're seeing globally is coming into our rooms, our counselling and therapy rooms all the time. One of the findings from this study I did was that we don't often talk about politics during our, for example, our core training. But I think one of the first things we need to do is define what we mean by politics and the political. So there's an activist phrase that I'm using in my title for this talk, and I'll talk about here, which is the personal is political. And one of the people that's attributed to is Carol Hanisch. And I was familiar with this phrase for a long time before I ever read about it. But when I did read some of her writings, I was fascinated because she talks about working with women's liberation groups. And these were women's groups talking about personal problems that they were encountering in their life, which it might be the sort of thing that we can understand very well as counsellors and psychotherapists, emotional groups where we're talking about our problems. But notably, she says, and I'll quote her, she says, "The reason I participate in these meetings is not to solve any personal problems. One of the first things we discover in these groups is that personal problems are political problems. There are no personal solutions at this time. There is only collective action for a collective solution. We might be talking about something which we label as personal, but at its roots it has some sort of political power dimension to it. So if we go back to the cold room for a moment, if you imagine how you might have a conversation with someone in that room who's telling you all about how miserable they feel and how difficult things are, the problem is indeed some ways personal. How they feel, their well-being, their thoughts about it, their behaviours, how they're managing it, their mental health, however you want to label it, that is personal. And feeling a bit miserable is a personal problem, but personal problems are rooted in power relations. Because importantly, this understanding of the personal is political rests on an understanding of politics and political, which is slightly different from, though not unconnected from, electoral politics or government. So when I say political, I'm not just talking about who you vote for. I'm not talking about who's in power, who the government is, who your how those systems work in your country or your area. Politics here with a small p as opposed to a big P refers to power relations and the way we structure these in society. So even though you might argue that the problem of the miserable person in the cold room is personal, you can also see that their personal problem is political. Because the problem is also about who has access to turning the heating on, like we said, and whether or not they do it, whether or not the windows are fixed and closed when they need to be, and who has access to the hot water bottles and the blankets. Their being cold is undoubtedly political as well as being miserable is political. So we have two understandings of politics here. Big P, the first one there, referring to electoral politics, the work of governments, states. And I think this is the association that, at least for most people, comes to mind when first hearing the word political. And I think that's sometimes why people get the idea that social justice in counselling is about telling people what opinions they should have about government or party politics or however it works. That's not what this is about. Small p politics is about everyday decision making and power relations. It's about who has a voice, who can speak, how do people relate to one another, who has choices and who has not got choices, who faces additional barriers. And this one is most relevant to psychotherapy, I think, although they're both connected. Carl Rogers, who many of you might know as one of the most influential humanistic psychologists, talked about a similar thing in his 1978 text on personal power. He speaks about how people had been telling him for years that the person-centred or the client-centred approach was political, but he hadn't understood it. He'd been like, no, it's not. But he hadn't stood it correctly because of his focus on what I'm referring to as big P politics. Once he understood the political in the small p sense of referring to power relations, he did agree that the person-centred approach could be considered more political in nature because of its emphasis on an equal client-therapist relationship, a non-expert stance from the therapist, and a respecting of what your individual client's knowledge and expertise on their own problems is. When we understand political in these two ways, the connections between psychology and politics, I think, become clear. Both in terms of the link between mental health and politics and the link between therapy and politics. Our mental health is impacted by both big P political decision making and small p political power relations. So, for example, a lot of research, both quantitative and qualitative in the United Kingdom, has looked at the psychological impacts of austerity, which is a government policy to cut spending across numerous areas of public services. Research has shown the significant detrimental impacts of austerity on well-being and mental health outcomes. Research has also shown that living in a cold, damp household impacts negatively on our mental health. We know that in the United Kingdom there are a small number of wealthy people who are able to own second homes and rent them out to people. And we often see difficulties of damp in rented accommodation, which is less well looked after. We also know that due to political and economic factors and the costs of living having increased massively, meaning people are not heating their homes as much. Research also shows that there's a relationship with food insecurity and use of food banks, with feelings of embarrassment and shame. And we know that oppression and racial discrimination significantly impacts mental health and well-being. Now, looking at these findings together, and I could have chosen any number of examples from the vast body of research which illustrates this, we can see that mental health is political. And you'll have more examples from your own national context that you can think of too. We also know that as well as mental health being political, psychological therapy is political and impacted by politics. Participants in the study I referred to earlier noted that the therapeutic work is political, highlighting that there is a power relationship between the therapist and client, with the therapist more powerful. Identity, cultural and economic issues, race, gender, sexuality, class, permeate and shape the therapeutic relationship. So this mainly related to small p politics, but we also know that the big P political views will come into the room, and increasingly with the polarisation we're seeing, this is happening even more so. Research from the United States, for example, looks at how service users speak about electoral politics with their therapists, and research from one of the doctoral students at Manchester recently, Nicola Farrar, has looked at how political polarisation and so-called culture wars are coming into the therapy room. If we return to our cold room now, where we began, what do we now know, and how might we look at things slightly differently? We know that the social factors which are impacting how different people experience being in that room and their mood are not only social determinants of mental health, they're political. We know that a large amount of the explanation for the distress is political. And when we see things that way, the next question to ask is, how does that change what we do in the psychological therapies? Will we still respond individually by working with people one-on-one or small group by small group who are miserable and get them running, huddling, adding layers, giving them hot drinks? Or will we recognise the importance of the environment in a neutral way and turn the heating on and say that that's fixed it? Or the third option that I'm advocating for is that we consider instead how to support different groups and individuals differently and turn the heating on and work with individuals, as well as working to create access to controlling the heating and fixing the windows. Will we work with those in the room to think about how power is structured and shared? So for several years now, I've been working on articulating what a social justice approach might look like for practitioner psychologists, building on those definitions of social justice and understanding of social justice as political we've seen so far. Social justice is both a goal and a process, and social justice values require action. The action and practice for psychologists can occur at various levels of the environment. I don't know if you're familiar with Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, but if we think about the kind of diagram here, we can see the individual is embedded within kind of a large number of systems around it, each of which impact on the individual. So the family, school and peers in the first one, then moving out to the workplace, perhaps the neighbourhood, moving out further to the economic, political systems, and so on. The macro level social justice work, I would suggest, involves things like psychologists engaging in policy advocacy or having an influence on the development of social policy and engaging in political action. On a meso level, so they're kind of slightly nearer to the individuals we might traditionally work closely with, might involve working alongside communities to make positive change or organisations. And the micro level of social justice work is still important too. A social justice approach isn't about reframing all psychological practice about the broader systems and ignoring the psychological and the individual. And I expect no matter the social or political climate, we would all need the individual work still too. But social justice informed psychological practice might need to take different factors into account, and it might look slightly different to working from within other more traditional models which don't necessarily adopt this social justice approach. So in the final part of this talk, I just want to turn to each of these three levels briefly to say something about what they might look like. So firstly, I think psychologists have a role to play in influencing social policy and working alongside policymakers. I've recently finished a study with colleagues at Indiana University in the United States where we spoke to school psychologists and counselling psychologists with experience of influencing social policy. And they told us things like you can see in the quote on the slide. As psychologists, we are uniquely trained and situated to be very effective as advocates. I mean, every skill we currently train future psychologists in, the people skills, the relational skills, the understanding of context, the motivation, to be able to distill and communicate evidence-based practice, those are the skills of a very effective advocate. So we have many of the skills of this work already. They're transferable skills from our training and work as psychologists, but participants in the study also talked about how it wasn't typically seen as a core part of the job, that they needed additional skills beyond their graduate training, and that they would benefit from greater support from professional bodies to engage fully in this work. So these were people who were providing evidence to governments. They were working on projects which were speaking directly to how we should change and shape national policy. On the meso level, there are a variety of ways in which psychologists might work with and alongside community organisations and groups to facilitate change. Importantly, this isn't about psychologists coming in to fix things and bring their superior knowledge to address the problems community groups are wrestling with and then leaving. Instead, we might work alongside communities to support, to learn and address any difficulties or problems collaboratively. Concrete examples of such work include psychologists working alongside youth groups, charities, or organisations who support specific groups such as asylum seekers and refugees or people who are experiencing homelessness. Or psychologists might facilitate group dialogue between those with opposing views or those in conflict. To give one quick example of this, I edited a handbook, the Handbook of Social Justice in Psychological Therapies in 2023, and one of the chapters in that from some colleagues, Lungi et al., the authors, who included a psychologist and a participatory action researcher and a youth worker, describe a project that they did, a youth-led social action project called Take the Power Back, and the participatory action research associated with this. In this, the psychologists and research involved worked alongside the young people, and these young people had lived experience of serious youth violence. To make decisions and act together, they focused on responses to serious youth violence and the broader connections with racism and inequalities. The process drew on different approaches where they considered aspects of their lives in a symbolic way, as well as reflective activities. And output, so what they produced from that project was a call to action and a podcast. They worked alongside their members of parliament and other activists, as well as engaging in media work and broader campaigns. Finally, on the micro level of looking at our therapeutic work, Divine Charura, a marvellous professor from the United Kingdom, and I have developed some ideas on what social justice informed therapeutic practice might look like, including 3 core principles, which you'll see on the top line there, and several areas of focus in the work. So the core principles of social justice informed therapeutic work that we talk about is that the work needs to be informed by relational ethical thinking. It needs to ensure that the work is transformative, and finally that the work is politically informed, as I've discussed today. So our relational ethical approach is informed by our social justice values, which means that we should take our histories, our identities, and our socio-political contexts, our own and our clients, into account, and the relational space between us. The social justice values we saw in earlier definitions inform our relational ethical decision making. The transformative approach means we go beyond reducing distress and understanding our roles as about prevention and about wellness, not only as about distress and mental health problems. Finally, the politically informed nature means we consider power relations, our social identities, our histories, and how political decision making is influencing our clients. So importantly, this isn't about your therapist telling you what you should think about political issues. It's not about imposing a political view on our clients. It's much more about understanding the power relations both in the room and our shared understanding of someone's distress. It's more about not ignoring the political factors which impact them, even if we can't change them. Otherwise, we keep people feeling like they are the cause of all their own problems. And it is all down to something about their individual psychology. Areas in which these principles might be particularly visible, or areas considered in this work, are found on the bottom line here. In particular, ensuring that collaboration happens as a matter of principle. And this is important because of epistemic justice and ensuring that psychologists are not dismissing other forms of knowledge and understanding beyond their own. Broaching includes having a cultural conversation in the room and not ignoring social, culture, and political factors within our dialogue. If somebody raises something about their socio-political identity, it's about not turning away from that or ignoring that. And reflexivity permeates all of this, both in relation to our reactions and our responses, and also in relation to our own intersectionality, our own identity. We also need to consider standings within the room. So, a social justice approach to applied psychology involves thinking about the way in which our work is structured by and influenced by politics, both big P and small, and how our work can have political implications. We, I think, are part of broader systems, and the personal is political, meaning we cannot pretend that our practice can be neutral or value-free. It's not about pursuing and pushing a political agenda, but it's about recognising the power relations which structure the social determinants of mental health and enter into our work. It's about recognising that these things don't just happen, and we can cast our critical reflexive eye as psychotherapists, as counsellors, as psychologists on understanding the broader picture rather than focusing only on how somebody is thinking or feeling and how their own intrapsychological process is happening. Our cold room does not need to remain cold, and our society does not have to remain as it is. If psychologists adopt a social justice agenda, they can address both fairness and wellness. And hopefully that will mean that they can then make a positive change for everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. It's a great presentation, Laura. Okay, I will move to the next session. Is a question and answer session, and I will choose 3 participants. Okay, for the participant of is ICGZ, please you can raise your hand or leave your question in a comment section. Okay, let us wait. Look at. Okay. The center 4. What is? Okay. Wait, Laura. Muhammad Suhada. Mr. Muhammad Suhada. Your right hand.
I think there are 2 hands up.
Okay, yeah. Mr. Muhammad Suhada, do you want to ask next question? Can
I think you're on mute. I can't hear you, sorry.
yeah. Can you unmute Muhammad Suhada?
Okay,
Okay, you can. Okay, you can ask your question.
okay. Good afternoon, Miss Laura Winter.
Thank you very
Uh,
much.
yes. Let me introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Suhata, and I still study in Universitas State University of Surabaya. I interest from your describe about presentation today, and I will ask about question. In psychology context and mental health, how about uh, person include about depression and confused can relate to face about political issue more than include social justice about economics, discrimination, and public policy. And then how far responsibility therapists or counselor can help counseling to identification for the face about the root of problem politics in individual or personal.
Yeah,
I think like that, Miss, maybe you can
I think that's a really good question.
answer
So, as
that
far as
my
I
question.
understand it, then, you
Yes.
know, if we're working with someone who's
Uh,
experiencing depression,
Yeah,
right.
but they've got all these other sorts of factors going on.
yeah. That's
Yes.
right.
How do we kind of, how far is our responsibility? I think that was the question. How can we kind of be responsible to address all these root causes? And for me, I don't think it's about us having to solve all the problems beyond that. But I think the problem lies where psychology almost like it pretends that those other factors aren't real by not mentioning them. So if we get somebody coming to see us in a clinic and they're really depressed and they're really low, all the usual stuff that we're used to doing, so all of the cognitive work or all the behavioral work or even all of the kind of emotional kind of non-directive work that we're used to doing is all still really relevant. But if we fail to take account of the fact that some of their problems might be because of poor housing or the fact that they've just lost their job or one of these broader factors, if we don't mention that at all, if we don't talk about it, if they raise it and we kind of move the conversation on, then we're making somebody feel like the problem is all about them, even when it's not. And I do think we have a responsibility, but it's kind of separate to individual clients, to to have a voice when things are causing problems. So, for example, in a United Kingdom perspective, if there's a particularly difficult, damaging social policy, I think that's an area we can do research. It's an area we can then use our research to make the case that this is having damaging impacts on society. So it's definitely not about saying, oh gosh, all psychologists are now responsible for absolutely everything, because I think that would be very overwhelming, and it's not what we're trained to do. Um, but it's about not forgetting it and not pretending almost. And I think sometimes psychology has made people has looked or made it look like these things are just, it's not about those, it's just an individual with their individual responsibility. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, Mr. Suhada.
Thank you for your answer, Miss.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Okay, the second raised hand is Miss Duisona. Miss Duisona, can you unmute? Miss Duisona? Okay,
Okay.
please, time is yours.
Terima kasih. Thank you. Uh,
Nice to meet you, Miss Laura.
Lovely to meet you too. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, my English is not good,
It's
but
far better than I can speak in any other language, so
yeah,
don't worry.
thank you. But your material is very interesting because recently in Indonesia, political issue is very hot.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes, I'm
my
aware.
question is, should therapy be political natural, or should instead take a stand for for social justice?
Yeah.
How?
I kind of think we need both, is the honest answer. I kind of think I think we're always going to need to support people on an individual basis when things like you're kind of referring to are happening, when there's a lot of instability, when there's a lot of disruption, when various groups in society are at odds. And we've been talking about this a lot in the United Kingdom as well. There's a lot going on in terms of different groups clashing here. And I think there's a role for us as psychologists to think about, well, what's happening there? Both support the individuals, but also to acknowledge that this stuff does play a role. And I think, there was a long time where psychologists said, this cannot come into the room. If your client comes to you and you start talking and they start talking about racism, then it's always about them as an individual. It's not about the structural. And I think now we've got a greater understanding of how to ensure we recognise that within the room. But I also think, yes, we have a broader responsibility to think about how we can inform those broader debates as well. Does that help answer your question? If it doesn't, do ask me a follow-up.
How about it, Miss Trisana? Miss Trisana?
Always have to find that button, don't you, to
wait.
unmute.
On mute, yeah. She is on mute. Miss Trisana? Miss Trisana?
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you, Miss Laura, for your the answer. It's very nice.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
A great question, and I do hope things are.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I kind of hope that things improve globally soon, because I think we've seen a period in which the sort of things that I'm talking about are even more important because of how much is happening across the world to lots of different groups of people, really. And I think we need to not turn away from that if we can. But we also need to take care of ourselves. And I know that that's harder when you've got a backdrop of things being very unstable and very, very live.
Yeah, I must learn about this politics with the psychological. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Miss Trisana. Okay, we have one question. Who's one? If there is no question, I will ask a question because it's interesting material for me. Okay, any question for the participant? Okay, so the last question for me. Like, I will ask a question: how can understand social change that affects our mental health? For example, the unstable social political condition in our country. It's mean that all social media platform and field of political and etc. And it's can sometimes leave confused. We are confused about its truthfulness or no, and unlimitedly making we are uncomfortable. So how we can understand that is can change our mental health.
how we can understand which part of it, sorry. How we can understand, because you mentioned social media as well, did
Yeah,
you?
social media,
Yeah,
it's political and etc. So the condition of political in our country, it's
yeah,
all in social media information, and we don't know
yeah,
if it's true or false information. So maybe
yeah,
sometimes we are uncomfortable about it.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good point. And increasingly, I think it's another area where um, there's something about the information that we can give as as psychologists, as practitioners in this area to I think people don't always understand that so again, social media doesn't just happen. It doesn't just exist. It's not neutral. The way it's run is not
Mm,
neutral. It's based on all sorts of
mm,
algorithms and it's fed in particular ways. And I do think, again, it's a similar picture here in some ways
mm,
that we're seeing how this the way that we're engaging with technology is then influencing how we engage with human beings. Um, and I think there's something about our understanding of the other that becomes really key here. My colleague Mick Cooper has done some work on how we might um, kind of understand and not judge or
mhm,
criticize or immediately jump to that and instead be quite open-minded even when something's quite hard and things
mhm,
are quite polarized. And I think there's something about trying to understand the systems and how misinformation or hate sometimes is spread quite quickly. But I think public information about how social media is working is really helpful. You know, being able to say, look, this is what is happening. Um, Although I don't think we have the answers at the moment in some ways for how we can address that on wider scales. I think there's still quite a lot of work to do to kind of look at how we can reach parts of society that feel very, very marginalised at the moment.
okay.
Um, but I do think that social media has a really big role, so I think it's a fabulous question.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Laura. Okay, oh my God, we are running out of time of limited discussion today, Dr. Laura. It's a great of a presentation and great discussion for the day. The first, I want to present a summary for this afternoon session. Okay, it's a very interesting idea. The personal is political, how the therapist advocated their client manages themselves and everything that developed within them as a part of small political system. Social conditions significantly influence an individual psychological states, including issue of fairness and meeting life needs, self-esteem, mental health, and so on. Understanding encourage to us remain sensitive to all you, Dr. Laura, and I hope we can meet until the next ICGC 2026, or maybe we can initiating cooperation with State University of Surabaya, with University of Manchester, especially in community research and learning process on community counseling. And for your information, we have a subject of special subject in community counseling on bachelor degree and the master degree. So maybe we can collaboration about it. Okay. Thank you very much, and may you are always in happy and to able to provide insight from all of us today. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you very much. It was lovely to speak with you all and enjoy the rest of your conference as well.
Thank you, thank you. Okay. Okay, from the Master of Ceremony, we come back to the section of
Okay,
ICGC 2026. Thank you.
thank thank you, Miss Arika Dewi and Miss Laura Winter for the wonderful insight about social politics. But before we ended this fabulous activity as a form of our gratitude, uh, we would like to present a certificate to Miss Laura through Mr. Afif. So, Mr. Afif, the time is yours. Mr. Afif? You may hold a little while, Miss Laura. There are a little technical difficulty on our hand, so please forgive us.
Not a problem at all. There are always some technical difficulties on these things, aren't there?
Unmute. Hello, Dr. Laura Winter. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Okay, that was really good presentation, and we can have so many insights from you. Now I will hand the certificate on behalf of our head of undergraduate program for you. So this is the e-certificate that later I will send it to you through your email. Okay, for the documentation, can you help us? Okay, Dr. Laura, can you give us the big smile? Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Laura. So I will hand it over to the Master of Ceremony to lead for the documentation. Please, Master of Ceremony.
Thank you so much, Mr. Afif and Miss Laura. So before we ended our session today, we would like to remind our dear participant to not forget to screenshot this meeting with Dr. Laura as a proof for your certificate. Now get back to my partner.
Okay, dear ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the last agenda, which is closing. But before we end this meeting, I'm as Mrs. and Master of Ceremony, Nasolita Sharudi, and
Ayazria Fatana.
as the human being, we realize that we can avoid some mistake. So we apologize to you all, and don't forget to say thank you so much for your nice attention. Okay, guys, see you later. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Recording stopped.
Okay, wait a minute. Before we.